He says no. If the dean says no, you don't start. Oh. It's
Marilyn
like
just went to the ladies' room. And she'll be back, so let's wait for Marilyn.
I think we're going to wait for Marilyn. And now you all have to promise not to say anything that we know where she is. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'd like to thank you very much for coming here today. Marilyn, my stepmother, who has been my stepmother for 25 years, and was the light of my father's life. And myself, I'm Nina Gilden Seavey, and my brothers, David and Daniel, have organized this event in an attempt to bring just some joy into my father's passing, because we feel that his life was a life of commitment and a life of passion. And we felt really sad when he died. And we wanted to do something that just had some meaning. And my father was very opposed to having a funeral, which he really didn't want. But he believed in moments that have meaning. And so what we have tried to do here today is to bring together a group of people for which meaning would also be sort of the reason that you would want to be here. And to have a moment where we could reflect on his life and his work, and hopefully, have that serve as an emblem and as a model for maybe our own lives or maybe the lives of our children, and to sort of come back and reflect upon what his life meant and the various facets of it. And I think it's fitting that we would sort of end this event, which is a more or less retrospective event, with something that is much more future-oriented, which is the dedication of the sculpture that you see behind me to the law school here at Washington University. And in the hopes that other people will come to see it and read the plaque that will sit next to it, and try to sort of bring forward some of the values that my father represented. Some of the people that are going to speak here today, and again, I think all of you knew my father intimately. He was a man who touched many, many people in a variety of ways, and the people that we asked to speak here today were not necessarily closer or more, sort of more intimate or more friendly or more important, but these were people that we felt sort of represented a variety of aspects of his life. And when some of these people have had a moment to talk, we'd actually also like to have anybody else who'd like to say something impromptu to stand and sort of join with us. The first person that I'd like to introduce you to today was a case, and I remember the day that my father found out that they won the Ronnie Levy case. And I have never seen him just burst with joy, because he felt, and I hope that Ronnie is going to tell you a little bit about the case, or should I do that? I think you should do that. It's your case. But it was, my father was desperately opposed to the Vietnam War, and he believed in the people who decided to fight against America's involvement in that war. And this will be somewhat of a recurrent theme here today, a little bit. And the first case that I remember that my father could barely believe that he had sort of slain those tyrants was with the Ronnie Levy case. And Ronnie came all the way from Ellicott City, I believe, in Maryland, or somewhere close to that, or somewhere in Virginia, to join us here today. And I'd like to introduce you to Ronnie Levy.
Thank you very much, Nina. It's Virginia. Okay. I feel very privileged to be here today to honor Lou. He was a genuinely remarkable person. He combined wisdom and compassion, conviction, conscience, a powerful sense of justice. I met Lou, I guess I introduced myself to Lou through a kind of odd set of circumstances. I was having some trouble with the draft. I was contemplating refusing induction into the military, which I guess was a growth industry at the time. And there were a few lawyers whose names I had heard from various people who handled things like this. Lou's was not one of those names. But I called up one of these attorneys, and he was too busy to handle my case, but he suggested several other names. And the last name he came to, I remember, was Lou's. And I still remember the words. He said, yeah, another person is Lou Gilden. He's a real tiger. That was the word he used. And it took me a while to learn what that meant. Well, I called Lou, and he had me come down to his office in the, I think, the International Building on Chestnut Street, 722, upstairs from the magic shop, which I guess was appropriate given what he did. And I met him for the first time, and I was a little bit surprised by the way he looked. Somehow I was expecting someone who was willing to take the case of a person who was about to refuse induction to be a little bit less debonair than he turned out to be. He looked like he didn't mind wearing a coat and tie, which I may be wrong, but that's certainly the way he seemed. He was really different from anybody I had met before. He was, my wife Pam and I were just in a state of panic. We knew what happened to people like me, and we just did not feel comfortable with the situation, I guess is the way to put it. But Lou was always very calming. He wasn't particularly optimistic, but he was calming in the sense that he seemed to always know what to do. He seemed to know how to handle situations. And at the same time, he was willing to accept any kind of oddball suggestions we might make about a possible defense. You know, I knew nothing at all about the law. I looked through the Constitution, I found a phrase, and I say, hey, isn't this relevant? And he'd say, sure, we can try anything. That was kind of his attitude. Once in a while, though, he was unable to contain this chuckle he had. He had this really engaging laugh that came out once in a while when I guess he just couldn't keep a straight face anymore. Throughout the time that the appeal and the trial and the appeal were going on, Lou demonstrated surprising things about himself. He knew a lot about a lot of things. It turns out he had studied, I was a mathematics graduate student at the time. He had studied a lot of mathematics, and he was asking me fairly detailed questions about courses I took. You don't expect to walk into a lawyer's office and have them know what algebraic topology is or something like that, but he did. He knew a lot of chemistry. He had studied chemistry, and apparently he at one point had toyed with the idea of becoming a mathematician or a scientist of some sort or an engineer. He also knew a whole lot about sports, which surprised me. I remember being somewhat, I don't remember exactly where it was, but it may have been at a poker game or something that he was at, and people started peppering him with questions about the fine points of baseball, things like the infield fly rule and what constituted a balk and that sort of thing. And he seemed to know the answers to all these questions. And I don't think that's something he got in law school, but I may be wrong. While Lou was handling my case, he took on a whole lot of other draft cases. In fact, it seemed as though he was handling all the draft cases in the Eastern District of Missouri at one point. It was as though he was compensating by taking a lot more work for the fact that none of us was paying him. Up until my case came along, everybody had been found guilty and had been sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. And at the initial stage, a minor victory was that I was found guilty. That wasn't the victory, but I didn't get the $10,000 fine. I just got the 5 years in prison, which I guess saving $10,000 is worth something. But Lou appealed the case, and one day I remember I was walking back. I had a graduate student carol in Couples Hall down the way here, and I was walking back after an algebra class to my little carol, and my wife Pam was waiting outside the office. There was this din of students wandering the corridors, and Pam was waiting by my office, and she looked stunned, like I don't know, like the dog had been hit by a car or something like that. But she said in a very quiet voice, she said, "Lou just called, and we won the case." Now, I was just excited beyond words, and so was Pam, and from what Nina says, so was Lou. I don't remember ever having that sense of elation and excitement and joy at any other time in my life. We were just floating in air. For many years, Pam and I wondered what we could do to honor Lou for everything he had done for us. It's difficult to put into words the sense of gratitude that we had for everything he had done. In December of 1976, we had a baby girl, our first and only child, and we named her Wendy Gilden Levy, and Wendy is here today. As Wendy grew up, we told her everything Lou had done. We showed her the transcripts of the trials and so on. Wendy met Lou only once when she was about 2 years old, 20-some years ago. We were visiting St. Louis, and we visited Lou and Marilyn in their home. Shortly after we found out that Lou had died, I got an email message from Marilyn saying that she was going to call us. She apparently didn't know that we knew that Lou had died. And we asked Wendy if there was anything that she wanted us to tell Marilyn. And Wendy said, yes, please tell her that I've always been proud of my middle name. Thank you.
So, moving further through the war, some of you know that I'm a filmmaker, and every once in a while, a filmmaker has to write things down so that you try to get money for your films. And it's not usual that I would write something down when I'm speaking. So I wanted to read this little piece as by way of introduction of our next guests. Because it was written about this event, and it was written about a film that I was at the time making about this event. I didn't get the money for the film, by the way, but I hope it wasn't because of the way I wrote. It was not unusual for the telephone to ring in the middle of the night. Sometimes it was the police telling us that Grandma Frida's kosher grocery store down on DeBolivar had been burglarized, again. Sometimes it was the police telling my father, the lawyer, that he needed to come down and arrange for a bond hearing for yet more students who'd been arrested in protests against the Vietnam War. Or maybe it was because someone from Action had decided to crash a debutante ball. Or maybe it was because the Jesuits and the Sisters of the Loretto lived in a house financed by Cesar Chavez, who'd cooked up something normally un-Catholic behavior in support of a grape strike. In any case, it was always the police. This night was no different. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We were used to it, the harsh ring, and then the softness of the voices trying not to awaken the house, the quiet changing of clothing, and the creeping of my father out of the door, slowly pulling the car out of the large gate. Me, I'd turn over and I'd go to sleep. But this night was more different than I thought in the wisdom of my 11 years at first. It was May 5th, 1970, only a few days after the Kent State killings where 4 students had been killed by National Guardsmen in protest against the U.S. expansion of Vietnam into Cambodia. It was different this night because it was the night that Washington U buildings burned. That's why the telephone rang at 3 a.m. in the home of one of the handful of civil rights attorneys in the Midwest, calling Louis Gilden out of bed and momentarily awaking his 11-year-old daughter, me, Nina. It was always the police who called in the middle of the night. And there are 2 people who are with us who sort of were the inspiration for me writing that short passage for the film that I never did get to make. And one of them is probably somewhat known to you, his name is Howard Mechanic. And Howard's story has, of course, become sort of a mythological story in our own family, and then also a story, of course, which has sort of been very much in the national press within this past year. And the person who's going to speak after him is Ben Zeracore, who was, as my father put it, the smart one of the whole bunch. So, Ben, not Howard.
I'm honored to be here today and to honor Lou's memory and what he stood for. And I'm lucky to be here today, too, because of all the support I've received in the last year from the citizens of St. Louis, citizens in Arizona. A lot of them are here today. We had a reunion this weekend, and it's a real coincidence that we were able to have this reunion of people who are involved in the anti-war movement at Washington University. We happened to schedule it for this week, and we found out from Nina that she had this memorial scheduled for the same time, so we're able to be here. And there are a lot of people here in the audience who worked in the anti-war movement at Washington U who came in for this weekend from around the country, and these people deserve to be honored also because they stood up against a war in Southeast Asia, and Lou was there when we needed him. We were students at the time. I was 22 years old, and we needed some assistance, and Lou was there for us, and I'm just honored to be here for Lou. When I was told about this event, and I talked to Nina and asked her if some humorous events might be fit in here, and I'm glad Ronnie was a little humorous because that's always good to bring into these type of affairs. But contrary to what you may have read in a column in the newspaper this morning, my life was not a comedy. My life with Lou was not a comedy. It was very serious what we went through, and it was a tough situation for Lou to have to deal with what he faced. And Ronnie mentioned that Lou was not always the optimistic type, and I sort of can agree with you on that one. I received a 5-year sentence from Judge Meredith on a charge of throwing a cherry bomb at an anti-war demonstration. It was actually the evening of Kent State. Kent State happened on May 4th, and we had a demonstration at the start of the evening of May 4th. The actual charge was after midnight, so it was listed as May 5th. But it was the night of Kent State, and I remember talking to Lou. We had 7 people charged at Washington University for various federal charges, and I was the first one charged, which was not a good situation for us, according to Lou, to be the first trial out of the 7. And I was also the first person ever charged under a new federal law. It was listed under the Civil Rights Act, but it was an anti-riot type of law. I was the first person ever charged. I was going to be the test case on that. So Lou didn't think that was really positive for us to be the test case for that. But he did come up with something good news for me to think about before the trial, because he came in and said, well, I do have some good news. They assigned the judge, and you have Judge Meredith. And as you know, it didn't work out that way, that Judge Meredith sentenced me to 5 years. And he helped the prosecution in that case quite a bit. He actually helped the prosecutor question some witnesses. But Lou he did the best he could. And that's all we could really ask of anyone, to do the best you can. I just want to mention one other thing here, since I have the opportunity. In that column this morning, there was mention that some students may have thrown firecrackers that night to instigate return fire by bullets from the police authorities. And I just want to tell you, this is the wackiest thing I've heard in years. And the students out there were not trying to instigate anything. We were trying to end the war, and we did the best we could. And we had Lou on our side when we needed somebody to defend us. He was there from the beginning to the end. And one other thing I wanted to mention here, we've had events this week for our reunion. A couple of days ago, Nina came over to a reception we had when we talked about some of the people who helped in our campaign for presidential clemency. And Nina mentioned that Lou had told her on many occasions, I let Howard down. He didn't let me down. I want you to know that. I told you privately, and I want the public to know that he didn't let me down. I'm sorry that I wasn't here to tell him that. He did the best he could. He was a hard worker. That's the one thing that I'll remember about Lou is he worked and worked and worked. He did the best he could. And we were facing overwhelming odds there. I wish I had a jury like this at the time. So I'm sorry there wasn't some closure for Lou on this particular issue. This weekend is sort of closure for us. A lot of people, and I didn't understand this when I came to town here. I've been carrying around a burden for 30 years. I didn't realize how many of my friends were carrying around the same burden. They felt that they lost one of their own. And I was lost for 30 years, and I'm sorry that I wasn't here to see Lou. Lou also told Nina that Howard won't ever return. He was wrong. I'm happy he was wrong on that one. And I'm sorry I wasn't here. When I got out of prison on a presidential pardon in January, one of the first things I thought about was how I was sorry that Lou wasn't here to see that. I'd like to give to his widow a copy of my pardon for Lou.
I prepared a few comments, so if you don't mind, it's a little stilted, but I'd like to just read it, if I may. Exactly 31 years ago today, it was Lou Gilden that defended my rights for due process at this institution of higher learning. The university's hearing against 15 students for nonviolent ROTC demonstrations took place in a room not more than 200 meters from where the sculpture will stand for posterity. Today, we are honoring a man in his community for the principles of freedom and justice he believed in and lived by. That day, 31 years ago, he stood with me for the principle of the right to counsel and a fair trial before any punitive action could be administered. That day reminds me of how fragile my freedom is. How was it that he was only for a few? He was only a few who stood by the young and many. It is a time we try to remember now and feel the pull again. I recall that time when Louis Gilden experienced social and professional pressures because he defended the people from a system that demanded conformity. How hard it was, or it must have been, for him to defend the unpopular in a community that was not tolerant of certain ideas or expression. I recall he never gave up on me or my friends, and most of all, his family. Yes, the family, a family that would remember together once a year a man named Howard Mechanic and what had become of him. It is our regret Louis Gilden did not experience the breath of freedom we all felt when Howard was freed from federal prison on January 20th. I want to believe he thought it would happen, but I know that Louis Gilden, the legal warrior of principles, was a realist. I am sure he knew it could only happen by the power of the idea and the belief in the principle. Until one of those, he taught me, until one has those, he taught me, one is adrift and susceptible to the pressures and powers of those who will exploit you. Now there is one less legal warrior for freedom and principle, but he touched many and has left his mark. May God bless him.
Lest we make too many wonderful comments about my father, he was a tough, angry, hard-driven, unrelenting, unforgiving, I don't want to use the words, but you can fill in the blanks. All you need to do is to ask McDonnell Douglas. And they will tell you that he was a man who was up, as somebody said this to Marilyn and I the other day, my father was always up for a knife fight at close range. And you were going to come out the loser no matter what in terms of the way that my father was going to fight that fight. And I want to sort of just bring you to the image that is over here on the right-hand side of, or my right, camera left, of my father that Marilyn took when the last time he was at the Supreme Court, he argued at the Supreme Court. And I felt that that image was so seminal in terms of who my father was. He was a lone warrior in the sense that he sort of always was, he was sort of an individualist in that sense. And he fought that fight, and he would fight it until the very bitter end. And that led him twice to the Supreme Court to be able to argue in front of the 9 justices. And I will tell you that I remember the case, the Percy Green case, and you're going to meet Percy Green in just a minute, so vividly because my younger brother and I think it was Daniel and I, went with him. And the night before he was to argue this case, and he'd never argued in front of the Supreme Court, it was the Oscars. And we wanted to watch the Oscars all the way to the end. And of course, I don't know, we must have been, 10 and 12 or something like that. And my father kept saying, "Don't you understand? Turn the TV off. I'm going to argue in front of the Supreme Court tomorrow." Well, of course, we just thought it was another day at work. So we get up there, and my father was in front of all the justices. And at that time, Rehnquist had recently joined the court. And so he was a junior judge on the very end, and Berger was the chief justice at the time. And Daniel and I were in the audience. And my father became, as he frequently did, very impassioned and started screaming at Rehnquist. And all I can remember thinking was, Dad, I don't think you're supposed to yell at these people. So, but it was obviously one of the most important cases in civil rights law to this time, and it has been sort of the badge of honor that my father was able to represent Percy Green, and I would like to invite you to welcome Percy here today.
I too want to, excuse me, I too want to say that it is a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to share with you some remarks on my friend Lou Gilden. Long live Lou Gilden. Let me hear you say that. Thanks. I went to work for McDonnell Douglas. I was working at McDonnell Douglas between 1954, I'll take that, 1956 up until 1964, at which time, 6 months prior to the time that I was terminated, I had climbed the Gateway Arch in protest. This happened sometime in July of 1964. Of course, prior to then, 1963, I had my first taste of civil rights activity during the Jefferson Bank protests. Charlie Oldham and others were already in jail at the time that I was manning a picket line. I started here and I'm moving back, but I'm trying to give you a thumbnail sketch. All of this is going someplace. I don't recall meeting Lou Gilden until sometime in 1964, right after I was terminated from McDonnell Douglas. Now, interesting enough, McDonnell Douglas saw fit to terminate me as a reduction in workforce shortly after climbing the arch. In fact, I was terminated on my birthday, August the 28th. So Robert Curtis, who was very active at the time, who was also an attorney and a very good friend of Lou Gilden, introduced me to Lou Gilden, and Lou Gilden and I was just chatting. We were just carrying on small talk. But never did I knew at the time that all of this activity was going to gravitate to the Green versus McDonnell case. But nonetheless, after being terminated, I was out trying to find employment, and then Lou Gilden introduced me to another person by the name of Howard Buckbinder. Howard Buckbinder knew another person by the name of Speckner. Can't think of his first name now, but Mr. Speckner had a company called Bianco Manufacturing Company, and he saw fit to give me a job so I could try to make ends meet while I would try to get another gainful employment. Well, all during this time, I mean, we've talked from time to time, and we got to know each other, and I observed Lou Gilden being a person of principles. That was very, very important to me. So as time went on, Curtis and I talked about if there's anyone that could possibly represent me in court on the McDonnell situation, it would probably be Lou. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act was it was ratified in 1964, but the employment aspects of it went into effect in 1965. McDonnell Douglas ran an ad in the paper advertising employment, or advertising for employees for the job that I had held for about 7 years. So I then go out and make an application. I knew that this 1964 Civil Rights Act was coming into effect sometime, I think, in July of 1965. So I waited until after July of '65, and I go make my application. And of course, McDonald refused to hire me at that point. And of course, I filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission that I was refused employment on the grounds of being black and because of my civil rights activities. And then, of course, the rest is history. I would leave it up to people like Robert Reinhold and Charlie Oldham to give you all of the specifics of what the case means and everything, the impact that it has made on the country. But I can say here without any doubt that the movement, the protest movement, may it be the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the war movement, we have lost a friend, a very strong supporter. And I will always forever miss Lou, as I had stated before. At the burial, I was very, very, and still is, very touched by his death. And I will just close by saying again, long live Lou Gilden. Thank you.
Well, Maryland. Outside of Maryland and occasionally his children, there were really only one or two people that my father was comfortable with. No, Percy, you weren't one of them. Howard, we haven't seen a lot of you. Charles Oldham is one of those people. He was my father's partner in spirit for many years, and they shared an office together for the last few. And I wanted to thank Charlie for something here that he doesn't know that I appreciate. But he allowed my father to continue his work, and thereby avoiding a retirement with a loom, and allowed him to work until he dropped, which is what he wanted to do. He loved the law. He had a passion for what he was doing. Charlie shared that passion, and together they worked until my father could work no longer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
One main problem Lou had, he couldn't be president of the United States because he was born in France. He came to the United States when he was 2 years old. He was raised here in St. Louis, an area close to Walton and Page Avenue, and went to school in the public schools in St. Louis. And then went to Washington University, and that's where I met Lou. At the time, I was agitating for the mission of Negroes to Washington University, and Lou supported that concept. We were both involved in some activities at that time. And then I graduated and went back to practice the law. And we sort of missed each other for a couple of years. And then we became very close friends. Lou did a lot of things. He was a patron of the arts, as you can see, and he attended the opera. I never really understood the opera that well, but he enjoyed it, and I went with him a couple of times, and like I said, I enjoyed it. You know, he did a number of things. He was a talk show host. He hosted a jazz program at one time. He was into music. He knew it. And when I met him, came back to meet with him again, I found out that Lou had started out as an engineer, and that career didn't last too long. But he had a genetic trait which predisposed him to be a lawyer. In fact, I think he was born to be a lawyer. He didn't have any other occupation after he passed the law. Or, I remember he told me that when he first started out practice, he looked for a job. He couldn't find any job. They were scarce. He hooked up with a fellow that was doing collection work. But that only lasted until Lou got his first client who needed some benefits and had been mistreated. And from that point on, Lou took off in that direction and never looked back. You know, you've heard of a few of the cases here today, and the Howard Mechanic case, the war protesters cases, but his efforts went far beyond that. Recently, or not too long ago, something like 20 years ago, a client came to him and said, my daughter is in a mental institution. She's not being treated right. Lou filed suit in federal court. You know, that case lasted for a long time, but he made the state of Missouri undertake to treat patients like they should be treated, to keep records, to see that they were given the proper treatment and facilities. And that case was immense benefit to thousands and thousands of mental health patients in the state of Missouri, and also established a standard for other states, so that his efforts in that area went far beyond war protesters or something of this nature. It went to the basic needs of human society. Another case that he was involved in involved the tenants and the housing, public housing in St. Louis. And they were not being treated very nicely by the housing authority at that time. And they decided they had to do something about it, so they had called a rent strike. Well, the first thing the housing authority people did said, well, what the hell, we'll put them out. And fortunately, they came to Lou. And they weren't not put out. In fact, they changed their conditions of their housing, and that effect has permeated the aspects of public housing in the St. Louis area since that time. You know, I remember one time there was an occasion where we were having the Veiled Prophet, and they were having the affair down on the riverfront. And at that time, the powers that be were concerned about the people from East St. Louis coming to the fair. And so what they did, at that time, children would walk across each bridge and come to the fair on the riverfront and participate in the festivities. And the powers that be said, well, what the heck, or what the hell, we're going to close each bridge. And Lou called me that morning and said, Charlie, we got to do something about it. We met down at the office that morning, very bright and early, drew up a petition, called a judge, one of the federal judges, and got him to come down and open his office. And the judge issued an injunction and opened the bridge. And nobody has dared close the bridge yet except for repairs. You know, recently, one thing Lou did, he took cases which were not popular and cases which other attorneys would turn down. There's a couple in the room today, Tommy and Beverly Delph from Cape Girardeau. And Tommy was having difficulties on his job. He really was. They were calling him all sorts of names. He was an African American, and they let him know it in no uncertain terms. And finally, he said, I've had enough. I filed a complaint with the EEOC and then tried to get a lawyer in that area to represent him. He ended up coming to Lou Gilden, and Lou represented him, and this was towards just not too long ago. And Lou was not feeling the best in the world, so he asked me to come in and help him. But we did try the case down there. Lou carried the laboring oar, and he got a nice verdict. And when it was appealed, he argued the case in the Court of Appeals. And so this is another example of how he used the law to help individuals. I was proud to be associated with him. He was a teacher. You know, the first thing he did when he came to the office every morning was look at the advance sheets and see the most recent cases in which he was area of his interest. When people came to work for him, well, he showed them how to write briefs, how to do the legal research. And our next speaker is a recipient of his teaching efforts. She learned well. She became really a high-powered attorney. And we're all going to miss Lou. I'm going to miss him. After 25 years associating with the individual, it's hard not to be able to go to the offices. But things pass, and you have to put up with it. So, Doreen, would you come forward and talk about Lou and your experiences with him? Doreen Dodson.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Like everyone else, I'm delighted to be here with David and Danny and Nina and Marilyn today, and all of his other friends and clients and supporters over many years. Harper Lee, in 1926, wrote in To Kill a Mockingbird and gave us the character of Atticus Finch. And that fictional hero, Atticus Finch, has been someone that a lot of us as lawyers look up to. But we were luckier in St. Louis. We had our real, own, live Atticus Finch in Lou. As others have said, Lou was fierce, he was unrelenting, he was a tiger, he did like a knife fight, he was cranky, he was all of those things because he was an unrelenting advocate for human dignity and human rights. Lou used to make promises after he'd have a case that went on, for a little time, 8 years, maybe close to the age of some of his grandchildren in the jury box. A little 8-year case, been to the 8th Circuit 3 times, back up again. He would say, I'm not doing this again. Next time, they're going to pay me up front. I'm going to get some money. But the next case would walk in the office, they'd sit down. One of the cases I remember along the lines of what Charlie was saying about just the sort of human dignity. There were 2 bus loads of African-American school teachers, retired, and they went on a tour of the West. And on the way back, they stopped at a little town just over the Kansas border into Missouri. And as they pulled up to this rest stop to eat, the rest stop put a closed sign on its door. And the bus drivers, who were white, got off and went in and said, we don't understand. We called an hour ago, said we were on the way with these buses. You said you were open, you had plenty of room. And the owner said, well, you can come in and eat, you and that other white bus driver, but you can't bring your folks in. I mean, this was in my lifetime career. And we took that case, and we took lots of other ones. A religious discrimination, a race discrimination, a sex discrimination. Lou would say, well, just this one more time. He loved lost causes, and because they were so ethically and morally important to him, and because of his brilliance and his tenacity, they weren't lost causes. They turned out to be winners, even if maybe you did not get the verdict in court. I was so lucky to have Lou as my first boss. He hired me, who had no experience whatsoever, not even a summer job as a lawyer, as a law clerk during law school, with 3 very small children, younger than our jurors over here today. And he was the very best of mentors and the best of friends. He taught my children how to score baseball games. He did love baseball and knew it very well. And he taught me to write a brief, like Charlie said. And I really hated my first brief when it was 2 days before Christmas and I was on the 8th draft, and I hated Lou, but he was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Lou taught me how to take depositions, how to do all the fundamentals of being a lawyer. He taught me how to handle myself in federal court. He used to say, this was 1974, and he said, now you have to understand that when those federal judges who are up there now, and of course they were at that time all males and all white. He said, they don't see me, Lou Gilden. They don't see a white male. They see a black, female, Jewish, lesbian standing in front of them. And it's worse for you because you actually are a female. But he taught me how to stand tall. He taught me how to over-prepare. He taught me how to take, as he would say, the very smallest case that was so important to whoever that client was. And for the time you focused on that case, that was the critical case. He kicked me out of the nest. He knew how to do it. He kicked me before those federal judges and before the Eighth Circuit when I was, well, not a kid, but certainly immature legally. But the judges respected Lou, and I want to tell you one little story which I think shows the kind of respect. Howard Mechanic mentioned Judge Meredith, and those judges, the federal judges then from Southwest Missouri, did not like us very much at all, but they did respect Lou. And there was, and I must admit there's a certain irony being here in the Brian Cave moot courtroom today, since Brian Cave represented McDonnell Douglas, and we were always with those folks. But there was a case that we had where a sort of misguided younger attorney was very upset about a discovery, and that's when you're trying to get documents and those kinds of things in a case, and wrote a letter to the judge and accused Lou of unethical behavior and said that we were doing things that weren't right under the rules, filed a motion for contempt. And Judge Reagan set a hearing, and we appeared, and before the lawyer could open their mouth, the judge leaned over the bench and took his finger and said, I want you to understand something. This man, I don't like his cases, but he is the most ethical, the most responsible, one of the real heroes of the practice in St. Louis, and you are to withdraw this letter and withdraw this motion, and I never want to hear about it again. And I thought, from someone who was basically an enemy, in a sense, of Lou, that this was an amazing tribute. He raised a generation of lawyers in St. Louis between his law clerks and his associates. There are lots of us, both in St. Louis and all around the country. He taught us all the basic values, the real reasons that you're a lawyer. He taught us that we could be better than we thought we could be because he was the very best. He was fortunate for me to have him as my mentor and friend and boss, and it was fortunate for the thousands of people that Charlie mentioned, that Howard Mechanic mentioned, that Percy Green mentioned, thousands and thousands of people whose lives were changed because of the cases that Lou took. He lived his life following the admonishment of the book of Amos, to hate the evil and to love the good, and let judgment run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Toward the end of To Kill a Mockingbird, when Atticus Finch loses his case and Tom Robinson is convicted, and he picks up his briefcase and he leaves the courtroom, and all of the blacks in the balcony, because that was the only place that they were allowed to sit in that fictional town in Mississippi, stood up. And Scout, who was up there in the balcony, Atticus Finch's little girl, said, why are they standing up? And Reverend Sykes says, because your father's passing by. And, excuse me, this man is passing by today, and I'd like you all to stand and applaud him. Long live Lou Gilden, in Percy's words.
There is one other person, provided my father with a lot of comfort and a lifelong friendship. And that person is Dr. Jerry Gilden. He would come up.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll see if I can hold myself together. Lewis has been remembered here so beautifully in his professional life. So I would like to share with you a part of my remembrance. Legally, he is my cousin, but emotionally, he is my brother. A brother who is that special friend, who is there to share with you and care about you at all stages of your life and to understand in ways that only he could. There were many changes in our lives, but one thing remained constant: our friendship throughout. I always treasure my warm, loving memory of you, Louis, and we called him Lulu in his childhood days because he was born in France, and that's what his mother and father called him. So to us, we remember you, Lulu, as a wonderful human being. Thank you.
The only person that really made a difference to my father is my stepmother, Marilyn. For 25 years, my stepmother was the light of his life. She gave him peace, which was not easy for my father. She gave him love, which he had sometimes difficult accepting. And she was the recipient of his love, which sometimes he had a hard time giving. But there was no, in the very last moment of his life, the person he wanted to say goodbye to was Marilyn, because she is the light of his life. I'd like to introduce you to my stepmother.
That's a really hard introduction to follow. I was afraid I would not be able to deliver this speech today, so I wrote it out. And living better chemically, possibly I will be able to get through it. Being married to Lou for 25 years gave ample time for idle conversations and quiet reflection together. I have strung together a few segments from these exchanges in order to construct a brief narrative that explains the meaning of the sculpture entitled Justice and the Law, which we are presenting to the law school today. When Lou was in grade school, he had two heroes, Moses and Napoleon. That's true. The biblical Moses, because Moses led his people out of bondage in Egypt, and because Moses received the tablets of the law for his people. Napoleon, because Lou was born in France. His parents had been forced to flee from Russia and the very real perils of the Bolshevik Revolution. They fled to France, where they remained while awaiting visas to the United States. And during that period of 5 years waiting in France, Lou was born. When Lou was 2, the family came to the United States, joining other members of the Gilden family in St. Louis. Lou recalled that as a child, he coached his parents from the list of questions which they studied for their United States citizenship exam. This was, in fact, his first exposure to the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, documents that would later be so important in his practice of the law. In fact, someone the other day mentioned to me that he used the Bill of Rights as a knife when he was in the courtroom, which I thought was an appropriate metaphor. Lou graduated from Washington University School of Law in 1949. In the late 50s or early 1960s, probably about when he could begin to afford it, he commissioned this piece of relief sculpture for his law office from a sculptor then living in St. Louis, Frederick Gene Thallinger. The subject was to be justice and the law, an embodiment of the ideal that Lou upheld throughout his professional career, that through law, justice can be attained and upheld. This semi-abstract piece of sculpture uses symbols that convey this ideal. The law is symbolized by the Ten Commandments, or the tablets of the law, at the upper left. I'm an art historian, and I usually use a laser pointer when I lecture. And it would be here today, but I lost it last week. So these are the tablets of the law. I'm also going to point this out to you. So the tablets of the law are at the top left. The curved staff at the right symbolizes the biblical Moses. Below the tablets are several eyes, one of which has neither iris nor pupil. It suggests the ideal of justice, which is to be blind to all but the very essence of justice. The sculpture, which he proudly showed to me when I first visited his office, as a client, by the way, remained in Lou's law office until illness and death forced his office to be closed. The sculpture shall now be transferred from law office to the Washington University School of Law, where it will continue to be a visual delight and will also speak eloquently to the importance of justice and the law. I would now like to introduce to you Jean Joel Seligman, who will accept the sculpture on behalf of the Washington University School of Law. Thank you.
A few days ago, Elaine Jones, who's President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, wrote to me to convey to Marilyn, Nina, David, and Daniel the following thoughts. On behalf of the staff and Board of Directors of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, Incorporated, I want to express our sympathy to you and our own deep sorrow for the passing of your husband, Louis Gilden. Over a period of 30 years, Lou worked with us on many cases, including McDonnell Douglas versus Green, one of the most important employment discrimination decisions ever handed down by the United States Supreme Court. We knew Lou as both colleague and friend, and remember the many times he visited with us at the Inc. Fund's annual lawyers' conferences in Virginia. He was a great lawyer and a wonderful person. Few attorneys have practiced civil rights law as long and as well as Lou did, a testament to his dedication to the ideals of equality and justice. We and all who knew and loved him will miss Lou. However, he has left a legacy that will be long remembered by those who joined him in the fight and make the ideals of our country realities for all of its people. And that's from Elaine Jones. It's my honor to accept justice and the law from Marilyn and the Gilden family. It's also worth reflecting that as long as this School of Law stands, Lou Gilden will live. In our student body, in our faculty, there are those who share the ideals and principles of Lou. This sculpture will be a permanent inspiration that one lawyer can make a difference, that principles of justice mean more, sometimes, than the mightiest corporation or the most powerful university, that what ultimately matters in this country is an objective too rarely appreciated throughout this world, justice. We are all privileged in this country to live in an imperfect yet idealistic society that aspires to achieve the ideals that Lou stood for. It is our great honor to place this in our clinics, near our civil justice clinic, near our criminal justice clinic, near our employment discrimination clinic, where students who particularly cherish the ideals that Lou Gilden stood for will see it every day. Thank you on behalf of all of us at the school. Thank you to Lou.
Before we finish, we want to, again, as we said, we didn't really have, there's so many people in this room, and each one of, you, my father, touched or was touched by in some way. And if anybody would just like to give an impromptu thought, we didn't want to take too much time, but if there was something that you felt like you just wanted to say, we wanted to give you just a brief opportunity to do that. You can just do it, just say from your seat. And I'd like to introduce you to Joe Cohn's widow, who's here today, and she came up and Millie. Right. Here's Millie. What I'd like to do, just one more. There we go. Sorry, I missed you before. Richard. Mount Sinai. He loved you too, Richard. Richard, this has been lovely. He loved you very much, Richard. But thank you. Okay. Was there was
Beverly Guelph in the audience?
There you are. What we'd like to do is to invite you to join us in having a little bit of refreshment and in raising a glass to my father's memory so that we can sort of put him to a peaceful rest. You can just go right through the courtyard to the commons that's just on the other side, and we'd love to have you just join with us and to celebrate with a little glass of sherry his life and his work. Thank you for coming.